freaky friends. I'm Margaret.
And I'm Colleen. And we're the Cousins Weird.
And
we're virtual.
Because I have a child who has a fever and is vomiting, and nobody wants to be around me right now. I don't blame them. Even though I'm technically not sick yet. Hopefully I don't get this because it sucks. Yeah. I could be a carrier, and keep your germs to yourself, Margaret. So it's been a while since we recorded. Apologies. We were on vacation and I couldn't focus myself. But once I got down to the nitty-gritty, I took a ton of notes. So, yeah. But since our last recording, I had stitches in my face.
Margaret got beat up.
Because aesthetics is dangerous. My steamer is spring-loaded and I was transporting it from home to work, and I had it, the inner pipe that telescopes, I had it all the way down, and when I loosened the screw, it shot up and smacked me right in the nose, and it basically got punched in the face with a pipe, and I had a cut under my nose, and I had stitches in it, and my nose was sore, and I couldn't properly even blow my nose because my nose was that sore, and I had a huge fat lip. It was horrible. But I'm done. My stitches are out, and I have the scar, and, it is what it is.
I can't see it on camera right now, but
it's not that bad, actually.
Oh, I see a little bit. Yep.
That's the scab.
Okay.
I have a little bit of a scab left. But,
she looks
and now,
like a badass.
Yeah, and now I have a vomiting child, which is also fun. Mm-hmm. As in, it's not fun at all.
Margaret and I went on a girls' weekend. Well, it was extended. We went from Friday to...
We left Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday. So we were there and we just relaxed and enjoyed ourselves and didn't really push it too much. So we were like, we'll just not record this week. It just worked out that way, but that's okay because sometimes some bitches needed week off.
We did. And, we ate food that had no calories because we're on vacation. And we ate a lot.
I ate nonstop.
Basically, it was so much fun.
Ate and
we drank a lot. We day drank. It was great. It was fun. And I day drank with one drink because I'm a lightweight about stuff like that. So. Ooh, I had a Bloody Mary today, and then later in the day I had a peppermint hot chocolate with peppermint vodka. It was so good.
It is very good. If you want another good thing is warmed. I can't drink it, but I had tea because I can't have stupid cider, but cider with caramel whiskey.
Yes.
Wasn't it? That's what it was?
Yes.
That's tasty.
So good.
Warm that shit up and have it around this time of year. You'll be a happy person.
I was. Yeah. Delicious.
I had it with apple tea, which was really good, actually.
Yeah.
So it worked out.
Those Celestial Seasonings teas have a sweetness to them without having sugar, which is nice.
Yeah. I love their tea. I like the apple cinnamon. I like the orange. How do you say that? Is it Pico or Poke?
Pico?
So,
that's black tea.
And then I like the one with the tiger on it. Is it the chai one?
Yeah, that one's good.
Good stuff.
And most of them are herbal, too. So
right. Delicious.
So good. I got a toasted vanilla spice as a new flavor. So yummy.
That was good because I had that also.
Mm-hmm. So, on to the episode. In my search for topics, I stumbled across a website that talked about odd occurrences, and they mentioned these two women in 1901 that either found a time loop or a place where energies like a haunting almost. Okay. And they wrote a book about it, these two women, in 1901. They wrote this book in the 1900s.
A long time ago.
Yeah. And they were, when the book originally came out, it's called An Adventure, and I actually got a copy of it. And they didn't have their real names on it because they were embarrassed and they didn't want, because this is Victorian times. They were unmarried. The one woman, her actual name was Charlotte Ann Moberly, and their names are on the book now because it's been so long that, she's the daughter of the Bishop of Salisbury, and she was the first principal of the St. Hugh's College for Women in Oxford. So she's got high standing for what they would have called an old maid.
Right.
She wasn't married.
Let's face it, during these times, women got put into mental institutions for everything. So if they would have said we did this, they would have locked them up.
They would, oh, you're crazy. You need to go to an asylum.
Yes.
And the woman who joined her name was Elenore Jourdain, and she was to be the vice principal at this college. And these two women had decided to take a trip to Paris together in the summer of 1901, and this was August. And they were like, they wanted to get to know each other before they were to spend time, because this is the principal and the vice principal. And so they didn't know each other well. I'm like, oh, let's take this trip. And I think back then, that's what women did. Like, you're not married, but you want to go to Paris, so you have to go with another woman.
Right.
Or your family, right? Because you couldn't go by yourself. So that August, they're in Paris. They decide to take a side trip to Versailles. And neither one of them were really excited to go on this trip because they thought, oh, we're going there too early. And, it's like they didn't know that much about Versailles, just from what little they knew from history, for teaching history at school, and they said that wasn't a lot. They didn't know a lot. They kind of expected to have a dull afternoon, and they stated that their ignorance made them unable to properly appreciate the charm of the palace. Their ignorance of it. And the book is broken down into the different women's accounts. And the first account is coming from Charlotte. She was the principal. And in the book, they refer to each other as like Miss Lamont and Miss something, because they don't give their actual names. But when I wrote down my notes, I used their actual names so it wasn't confusing. All right. So after they took the tour of the palace, and it was over, and the ladies, they were kind of relaxing by the Salle de Glace, which I believe is the Hall of Mirrors, if I'm right.
Sounds right.
You'll remember me talking about this during my King Ludwig episode, because he copied it in his castle, this Hall of Mirrors. So they're there, and they had plenty of time before the train left to take them back to Paris. So Charlotte suggested they go to explore the Petit Trianon, and she had read about it as a young girl and knew it to be a, like I'm putting in quotations, farmhouse where Marie Antoinette liked to spend time. And I say farmhouse because we're talking about royalty, and their idea of a farmhouse is probably a small mansion.
Yes.
But according to them, it's smaller than the palace, so it's a farmhouse, right?
Yeah, like their country home cottage is like another manor.
Right. So they found it on a map, and they went off. And they said they ended up taking the long way to find it because they didn't want to ask for anybody for directions. I said, and even though it had been sunny and hot all week, this day was somewhat overcast and it had a light wind. They said they had an enjoyable walk. It wasn't as hot. There was a nice breeze. They were just having a nice little stroll around Versailles. Like, who wouldn't want to do that,
I want to do that.
Yeah. They meandered for a while, and they eventually came to two men who they originally thought to be gardeners. And this is due to they saw a wheelbarrow there and a spade and some other tools. But they were dressed in long, like grayish green coats, and they had small three-cornered hats on. So they looked strange, like their dress was odd.
Clothes they've never.
Yeah. So she says they just continued walking forward, but Charlotte felt. At this point, she started to feel in her words, an extraordinary depression come over her. And once they left the lane, and then she says she just could not shake it off, and it got progressively worse as they kept walking. She's like, all of a sudden, she just felt this oppressiveness. She said there was no reason for her gloomy spirits. They just came out of nowhere. And then when they had reached the end of the path, it became overpowering. She said at this point, they were standing in front of a wooded area. But through it, they could see what she described as a light garden kiosk. And I think it's kind of like a small domed building that had like pillars on the side. So think almost like a pavilion, not even a pavilion. Like what is at your parents' house? Like almost, yeah, kind of like a gazebo, but a little bigger, a little grander. Yeah. She said that this was a circular building, which I just described, and there was a man sitting next to it. And this little place was surrounded by woods, and they could not see through it. Charlotte described it as looking unnatural and unpleasant, and the trees beyond the building seemed flat and lifeless, like a painted backdrop. It just felt strange, and she felt like it just was an unpleasant place, and it felt weird. She said at this point there was also no shadows, there was no wind, everything was still. Like, odd. Like there's no sound, it's just odd. Yeah, I know. I can feel it, like I feel the oppressiveness, and it gives me kind of chills, like I got goosebumps. Like, ooh, with that feeling in your back. They said when the man who was seated next to the kiosk turned to look at them, they saw that he was wearing a cloak and a large, what they called shady hat, which is probably like a floppy hat that would give you shade.
Fun hat.
And she said she felt genuine alarm, and she described his face as repulsive with an odious expression.
That's not very nice.
No. They also mentioned that he had scars on his face. His face was like pocked, like his cheeks. At this point, she turned to her companion, Elenore, and asked her which way they should go. But at that moment, they heard someone run up to them out of breath. But as they turned to look, no one was there. Not even the gardeners that they spotted earlier. They were gone too. Oh. So like, all of a sudden you're standing there and you turn to talk to someone, and then you hear like when someone's running and how they sound out of breath. And then you turn and there's nothing there. Like, yeah, get the creeps. And then the gardeners are gone. They said, but there was suddenly a man there. Like they turned back and then there was a man there. Oh. And she said she was shocked by his appearance. It shocked her. Like, where did he come from? Like they hear this out of breath person, and they turn and nothing's there. And then when they turn back, there's a man standing there. Yeah. They said he was apparently a gentleman, tall, large dark eyes, curly black hair with a large sombrero hat is how she described it. Huh. So, okay. She said it was handsome and looked like an old painting. He was wearing a dark cloak that was wrapped around him like a scarf. She said he looked excitedly at them and said, Madame, il n'est faute. And she said he pronounced it faute instead of thought. Like, when I don't speak French, but he pronounced one of the words differently than how it should have been pronounced, and she noted it. And he said, passer par là. He waved his arm and said animately, par ici, cherchez la maison. And I am butchering that translation because I speak French. I don't speak Paris, man. And I looked it up because they both spoke French, these women. And they wrote French in this book and did not explain it. So I'm like writing this book and I'm typing shit into Google to say, what does this mean? And what this means, he basically went up to them and said, ladies, you must not pass by. And he turned, waved his arm, and said, over here, look for the house. So she noted that he was, like, they had come to this path, and to the left of them was the kiosk with the strange man that looked unpleasant. Right. And then he's basically telling them they need to go to the right. And she was relieved because she didn't want to go walk past that guy. These two women, they're alone in the woods, and they're like, no, I'm not walking past that dude with the ugly face. I'm going to pass. He looks sinister.
Repulsive.
He's repulsive, yes. As she looked at him again, he made a backward movement and a peculiar smile, which is weird. And even though she could not understand everything he said, she did understand that they should go to the right, not the left. Which they did. They went to the right, towards there was a very small bridge there. They had mentioned, too, that where this kiosk was, there was like a stream and like a waterfall. Like, not even like a waterfall, it was like there was water trickling down. And then there's this little bridge there. And as they turned to thank him, they were surprised to notice he was gone.
Of course he was.
But they could hear running close to them, but they couldn't see anyone.
Again, move it running.
Yes, so, like, bizarre. I would have been the hell out of there so fast. Like, bye!
Repulsive man would have scared me away. Thank you.
Catch me a carriage. I'm off to the train. Goodbye. They crossed the bridge. This was a very small bridge. And the path led under some trees. It passed a narrow meadow that was filled with tall grass on one side and shadowed by many trees on the other side. There were so many trees to the point that they couldn't even see the house until they were really close to it. And there was a house through the trees, but they didn't know it was there until they had walked a little ways and it got closer to it. Okay. So I think this is a thickly wooded area on the other side there. The house was different than she expected. It was a square country house with long windows that were shuttered on the north side. This is the Trianon. This is basically what they're thinking, that this is the farmhouse they're looking for, the Petit Trianon. Yep. And these shuttered long windows overlooked an English garden, which is where they were standing. They were in the garden area. It had a terrace that wrapped around the north to the west side. Charlotte noted that she saw a woman sitting on a stool with her back to them, holding out a paper and looking at it. And she thought to herself, she's probably drawing or sketching or painting or something, because why else would she be sitting there? As the two ladies walked past her, she saw them, and as they continued to walk towards her, she turned and looked straight at them. And Charlotte noted that she was not young, though she was pretty, and had fair hair with a shady white hat perched on top. So she's wearing one of those shady floppy hats. She was wearing a light summer dress, and it was light in color. And she described it as arranged on her shoulders in a handkerchief fashion. And it was basically draped. I think, I'm not sure. It was draped over a low-cut bodice. Like a fichu, like what they used to wear in the olden times when if something was low-cut, they would tuck things into the bodice that cover up their cleavage. They said it was a pale. She was wearing a pale green fichu underneath. The dress was long-waisted with a full skirt, and she said that it was short. And to them, it probably meant it went to her ankles.
Right.
Or just above the ankle, because the Victorian ladies wore dresses that were longer. Right. Women didn't. Charlotte thought she was a tourist, even though she was wearing an unusual and old-fashioned dress. And as they walked up the steps to the terrace, she said she felt strange, as though she was in a dream. And once they got up the steps on the terrace and they looked out, the woman was down below, and she said she could still see her, right there. As soon as she turned around, they turned around and looked out over the gardens, and you could plainly see this woman sitting there in the stool. But she said it felt very still, and it felt oppressive to her. The atmosphere was odd. She says as they crossed the terrace toward what she called the Cour d'Honneur in the southwest, and I have no idea what a Cour d'Honneur is, because I didn't look it up. Pause right here. I'm going to look up what a Cour d'Honneur is. According to Merriam-Webster dictionary, a Cour d'Honneur is basically translates to court of honor, and it would be the principal and formal approach and forecourt of a large building. So they're looking out to the forecourt of the building, like the entrance, basically. And that was in the southwest. They noticed one of the long windows was unshuttered. So they went towards it. They're going to look and they're going to try to peek inside. And when they started to walk towards it, and a young man came out of a doorway there and told them the way into the house was through the Cour d'Honneur and offered to show them the way around. And he basically gave them a smirk, I'll show you the way. He's a young kid, He guided them to an entrance into the front drive, and they came out near the first lane they had been in originally. And she thought to herself, why hadn't the garden officials they came across first directed them back that way instead of forward? Because he told them, oh, go this way. When if he'd have told them to go back, it would have brought them right around to the front of the building. Oh. And so they kind of he directed them to go the long way around, to the back. And so, why did the those one guys tell us to go this way, when the guy here is telling us, oh no, you're in the wrong area, you have to go over here. So she thought it was really odd. As they're they said that once they got into the main like hallway inside the building that they were in, they said they had to wait for a French wedding party. They said, and as they're waiting, these people enlivened their spirits, and they felt better about everything. Like that feeling of oppressiveness went away, and they started to feel better. And there's these wedding guests, and they're lively, and there's music, and they're like, oh, this is fun. We feel better now. So after the tour of the cour, they went back to like the hotel near Versailles, and they had tea, and then they ended up taking the train back home, and to where they were staying in Paris. And neither of the ladies talked about it. They didn't talk about their experiences for like a whole week. And it wasn't even mentioned until a week later when Charlotte started writing a letter describing their adventures. And as she's thinking back to what they experienced, she started to feel that same dreamy, unnatural oppression that she felt while she was there. The feelings were so strong that she had to stop writing. And she said to Elenore, do you think that the Petit Trianon is haunted? And she immediately replied, yes, I do. And then Charlotte asked her where she felt it. And Elenore said, in the garden where we met the two men. But not just there. She said she also felt a depression and anxiety around the same place that Charlotte did, like while they were walking up on the terrace and as they're walking through the wooded area. After they started to talk to each other about what they had seen that day, they realized how theatrical everything seemed, and that the man in the cloak seemed overdressed for a warm summer day, and the fact that he was there and then gone. Like, they both were like, did you notice that, like, he was there and then we turned around and he wasn't there anymore? They're like, yeah. They're like, maybe he's just a fast runner, you know? And how they both
just
heard...
now talking about this? I would have been talking about the
they
second
didn't
it
mention it. Of course, in the Victorian times, they were both, like, both of the women said that I didn't want to mention it because I didn't want her to think I was weird. You know what I mean? Like, they were just like, I feel strange, but I don't want to say anything. And I think it's more of the times than anything.
Right.
And they both mentioned how they heard running, but saw no one. They both heard someone running and out of breath, and then but they didn't see anybody there. They did not speak about it for the rest of the trip. And every place they visited after that felt normal and natural. And this is what she wrote. Like she said that everything was natural after that. I'm like, what a odd way to describe things, you know? So 3 months goes by, and Elenore came to stay with Charlotte, and this was November 10th in 1901. And Charlotte brought up their strange trip to Versailles again, and she mentioned the lady sitting on the terrace sketching, and that they should have asked her directions. And then Elenore, she disclosed that she never saw a lady on the terrace. And Charlotte found it impossible due to the fact that they both walked straight up to her. Like, they're walking up, and she's in front of them. They walked right past her, up the steps, and turned around and looked, and she was right there. And she's like, how could you not have seen her? What are you talking about? She was right there. And at this point, both the ladies decided that they needed to write down their own accounts of what happened that day and to research the history of the Trianon and ask each other about it, and like ask around about it. So they're like, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to write down everything that happened there, and you should do it too. And that's so they could like see. Right. They wanted to compare notes. That was Charlotte's account. And now I'm going to read Elenore Jardine's account. She wrote that on the pathway leading to the Petit Trianon, she noticed empty, deserted farm buildings, and they had some discarded farm implements there. And as they reached the crest where the garden was, she started to feel as though they were lost and that something felt wrong. That was where they saw the two men dressed officially in green, and there was a wheelbarrow with gardening tools near them, and that these men told them to go straight on to the right. And Elenore felt also relieved because she didn't like the look of the man with the pockmarked face.
The grotesque man.
Yeah, at this point, Elenore noticed a cottage with a woman and a girl standing at the door, and that they were dressed unusually. She said they both had white kerchiefs tucked into their bodices, and the younger girl, who was probably about 13 or 14, wore a dress that went to her ankles, and the woman wore a white cap. And she thought it was odd that this girl was wearing a dress that was that long, because in the Victorian times, a girl that age could wear a short, like one,
Right.
like to a calf, you know? And the path the men directed them to seemed to take them away from where the Petite Trianon should have been, where she thought it should have been. Mm-hmm. So, like, these women, of course, at the time, they're women. They're like, which way do we go? Oh, go that way. You need to go that way. Okay, and they just did it. Like, they didn't question it. They're like, well, these men told us to go this way, so they're official, so we probably should do what they say.
Now I'd be like, I'm going the opposite direction, thank you.
Right. This is when Elenore started to feel that heavy oppressiveness and loneliness, and she said she began to feel as though she were walking in her sleep. Like, she was, it was surreal, like she wasn't really there. They came upon a building with columns and a roof nestled in the trees. And she saw and described the same man as Charlotte saw. As they turned on the path going away from this place, she also described the same man running towards them on the path, shouting at them in an unusual accent. Elenore described him as young-looking with a florid complexion, like he was red-faced. He had long dark hair, wearing clothing that was dark and heavy, and having buckled shoes. This was the man. I was confused. It wasn't the gardeners that told them away from the man. It was this man. It was the man with the, like, she didn't really look at his clothes closely. She just knew that they were dark and heavy looking. But she noticed he had buckled shoes, which she thought was odd for the time. Yeah, she's like, what is up with this dude's shoes? But she described walking until they came to the English garden in front of the Petite Trianon. And she said the place was deserted, but she also said that as they approached the terrace, she drew her skirt aside because she felt that she had to make room for someone. And after she did it, she wondered why she did it, because no one was there. So, like, as they walked past the lady on the stool, she moved her dress aside, but didn't know why she did it because she didn't see anyone.
Oh, okay.
So, like, after the fact, so after that, she was like, why did I do that? There's nobody there. Like, why did I move my dress? The rest of her recollections are pretty much the same as Miss Moberly's, like, after that, and the young man coming out of the building and telling them, you need to go over here.
Right.
When Miss Jourdain returned to school on November 10th, 1901, this is the day after her revelations with Miss Moberly, she started a lesson on the French Revolution. And it was then that she realized the significance of the date in which they visited Versailles. On August 10th, 1792, the Tuileries was sacked, and the royal family fled that morning to the Hall of the Assembly, where they were there for many hours and heard the sounds of their servants and their Swiss Guard being massacred.
Oh.
So this day that they went there was August 10th. 1901, and on August 10th, 1792, like, that's when the populace came and murdered all the servants and stuff that were there. So it's like, you understand the beginning of that day started out differently than the end of the day, you know?
Right.
From there, the king and queen were taken to the temple, it said. That night, she was recording her experiences. Elenore was visited by a friend who was French, who lived in Paris. Like, she had this French friend who came to visit her, and when Elenore asked her if she knew of any stories of haunting at the Petite Trianon, this French friend of hers said that she had some friends at Versailles who said that on a certain day in August, Marie Antoinette can be seen sitting outside the garden front at the Petite Trianon, wearing a floppy hat and light pink dress.
Oh.
And that the area surrounding it have people who were there during her time. So they said it's not just her that's haunting the place. It's her servants that were with her are seen around that area too. I think that's awesome. I want to go there on August 10th and see if I'm haunted by Marie Antoinette. I'm like, hell yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. When Elenore described to her friend the experience there and quoted to her what that man who said in the odd accent, her French friend said that sounded like the Austrian pronunciation of French. Because they kept mentioning it. He said that one word oddly, and they said that's how the Austrian people pronounce French. A lot of the servants that she had with her were Austrian.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there were Austrian people there. Upon doing her own investigations, Charlotte discovered that the clothing that they saw was the same for the time of Marie Antoinette. So all the weird things people were wearing, that's how people dressed then. She explained all of this to her brother, and they talked through it, and they're like, both of them are skeptical, and they're like, yeah, you have to try to figure out reasons why that would be so. Like, were there people that are dressed up to do a play or something like that? They're trying to figure it out. And she also realized that the boy who came out of the door to lead them to the right entrance of the building and the wedding party, they were real people. Like, those people were not part of the odd part. Like, after she saw him and he led them away, everything changed and felt different to her.
That makes sense, right? She said once you saw the wedding party, everything was better.
Yeah. Miss Jourdain was planning another trip to Paris for the Christmas holidays, and Miss Moberly asked her to try and return to the palace and figure out where they actually were when they were wandering around. Because they said they were wandered for a while, and it felt like they were lost and they didn't know which way to go. And then she asked her to try to go back there and find the kiosk again and all the different places where they went.
Right.
So she went back for the Christmas holiday, and on January 2nd of 1902, so it's not even a year later, because they went in August of 01. So, she goes back, it's not even a year later. She was dropped off right at the Petit Trianon, so she didn't have to wander around to try to look for it. She just was there. She gets there in the carriage, drops her off right there in the front. And she walked to the Temple de l'Amour, which was not the garden kiosk. She thought, she had a list of all these buildings that she thought could possibly be it from looking at a map. She goes to this Temple de l'Amour, and it's not that building. It doesn't look anything like it. And she also felt none of the strangeness that they felt before. So she crossed the large bridge over to go to the building they called the Hameau, or Hamu. And she said that feeling returned as she was walking, and she saw two men who she described as laborers, and they were wearing tunics and capes, and the capes had pointed hoods, and they were brightly colored in a terracotta red and a deep blue. And as she turned away for a second look at the Hameau, and then she looked back, and the men were gone. Elenore then went off to explore the Hameau, and then went on to the small orangery that was next to it, and then she made a wrong turn. And she ended up in a wooded area so thick she couldn't see the Hameau building through the trees. And as she was trying to find her way through this, there's a maze of paths in this woods, she heard something that sounded like clothes rustling behind her, and she thought to herself, what is it with these French people wearing silk in the wintertime? Because that's what it sounded like. It sounded like how silk rustles. She said it was that kind of sound. Yeah. And so she turned, and there was no one there. But she said she had this sense of oppressiveness, and she felt overwhelmed, like she was surrounded on all sides by people pressing into her. Yeah. And she could also hear women's voices speaking French, and she heard Monsieur et Madame spoken really close to her ear. Ew. And she's just feeling like she's alone, standing in the middle of the woods, feeling like there's people surrounding her and she can't move. No. Bye. Like I would scream and run as fast as I could. Yeah. Nope. So the feeling and the voices eventually faded away, and then after she heard faint music, from a band, and she'd said it didn't sound like it was that far away, but it kind of sounded like it was a phonograph. It had a weird quality to it. She said she felt the swish of a dress near her, but she didn't see anything. She said it was just so bizarre. And after wandering in the woods, and she said she had a map with her that she kept looking at, but it didn't seem to help her get out. She kept not finding the way out. So eventually she did find her way back to the orangery where she started. When she entered the woods, she was just past the orangery, and she's wandering around in there forever. Finally gets her way back out, and she's right where she started. And she's just like, how did I end up back here? Then after that, she found a gardener, and she asked him directions to the Queen's Grotto. He said that she was to follow the path back and past the Belvedere, which is one of the buildings she wanted to look at because she thought it might be that kiosk.
Oh, okay.
But, like, as she walked past this building, it was not the same building. She said it was different. And when she inquired about the band she heard, she was told that they had played the previous day, which was New Year's Day, the 1st, but not on the day that she was there.
Oh.
She said, they're like, where was the band? They're like, the band played, we had a band yesterday, but nothing today. And she's like, okay.
Oh,
Weird. Yeah. Miss Jourdain actually returned to the Trianon many times, but was unable to locate the kiosk that they saw on their first visit, or any of the other places they passed on their way to the Petite Trianon, including the woods that she was lost in. She said the place was entirely different, and and all the distances between the buildings were much less than what they had originally experienced when they went there. The grounds were bare of wooded areas, and the buildings were visible from one another. So, like, no matter where you were, you could see the buildings. Like
the first time they could.
Right. They couldn't see anything because there's tons of woods. In one of the books that they had read about Marie Antoinette, it describes a man called the Comte de Vaudreuil, and he was the one who supposedly betrayed her, and he was supposedly marked by smallpox scars on his face.
He was repulsive.
Yes, and he was the man, I guess he had invited her to the fatal acting of the Barbiere de Seville in her own theater at Trianon. So, like, he invited her to this theater to see this play, and I think that's when she was captured.
Oh.
And when Miss Jourdain, when Miss Jourdain went to the Comédie Francois in 1904 to watch the same play, she noticed that the alguazils were dressed exactly like the garden officials they saw at Trianon. And the only difference was they had red socks or something. Their socks were a different color. And when she looked into it, the Comédie Française, I can't speak French, I'm sorry. That play group is the descendant of the Royal Private Theatre, and that their royal liveries, in quotation marks, are reproductions of the original ones worn by the royal servants. So they use the liveries that the under actors wear are exact replicas of the ones that were worn by the servants at Versailles and royal ones. And on July 4th of 1904, this is not quite 3 years after their original first visit, the ladies returned to Versailles, and they were accompanied by a friend, and they just called her Mademoiselle Blank. They did not give her name. They just said that they were accompanied by a friend. And then on July 9th, just Charlotte and Elenore went back. So, like, the first time they went back on July 4th, they had a friend with them, and then because they walked through and everything was so different, they're like, well, maybe it just needs to be the two of us. So they went back again, same experience. Like, they said their visits this time were much different from the visit from 3 years previous. And even from Eleanor's visit the 2 years previous. Right. It was very busy. There were a lot of people there. They followed the same path, turning right again at the building now called the Logement des Corps de Gardes. And everything after this point was different. They said the gates in the wall were closed and had been for some time. Like, they could tell these gates hadn't been opened in decades, right? They came upon the gardener's house, which looked very different from Miss Jourdain's description from her visit in 1901, where she saw the woman and the girl in front of the cottage. That house looked different. She said, that's not the same house that was there. It doesn't look the same. And they said beyond this was a smooth lawn and flower beds. There was no sign of where they had previously seen the garden officials that directed them.
Right.
They spent much time searching for the paths they walked in the previous visits, but they could find no trace of any of them. Everything was closer together than it had seemed before, and they never found that kiosk again, or the small bridge with the stream and the little flowing water. That was gone. And the wooded areas were also much thinner and wouldn't even be described as woods. They were just random trees. Right. In the exact spot that Charlotte had seen and passed by that lady sitting on the stool, there was now, like, they went this time, and it was an old spreading bush that was many, many years old. And she's like, okay, more than 3 years old. This bush, she said, was many, many years.
Right.
So they said even the staircase that led to the terrace was different. Like, everything was different. Like, we're in a different, it was like, how could so much change in not even 3 years? Like, they were just dumbfounded.
Right. It's crazy.
She said the current atmosphere, she described it as modern. There were stalls throughout the land, like throughout the landscaping, that sold fruit and lemonade. There were noisy groups of tourists sitting and gathering around the numerous benches spread throughout the grounds. And she said it was busy, there was people there, it was loud. Like, they basically, yeah, and they said that it was like free roaming. You could just walk anywhere you wanted to. She's like, but before, when they were there, they felt directed. Like, they weren't allowed to walk in certain spots. Like, people said, oh no, you need to go over here. They said This time they didn't have that. They could just walk anywhere they wanted to, and nobody said anything to them.
Crazy.
Which is really weird. They followed the path to the Hamau Hunter had taken in 1902, and she could not find those thick woods that she'd gotten lost in, and all the paths were visible to each other. And it was summer, so she's like, when I came, it was winter. And I got lost because I couldn't see anything. Right. She's like, now it's summer and everything's growing and green and flowering and leafed out. And I could see everything. I could see all the paths. There's no woods anywhere. They had come across, in their wandering, they came across a gardener. And they asked him if there were woods in that part of the grounds before. And he said that he thought there had been, but it was before his time, before he worked there. And he'd been there over 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So in their subsequent research, because the ladies spent the next couple decades researching.
I'm sure they did.
This, because they're like, and I mean, we're talking 1900s, early 1900s. There was no Google. They had to ask French people. They had to go and
investigate.
Yeah. There was like, I don't even think libraries were really a thing then. I mean, they had to go find people from there that had it was just like, how do you find stuff like that? In their research, the ladies found out that the color green was one of the colors of the royal liveries, and that current workers didn't wear that color. And only the president was allowed to wear the color green on special occasions in France.
Wow.
At the time. So that's just,
wearing it.
Yeah. There's some more anecdotes that the ladies had, but I'm going to end my episode there. And I'm working on a companion to this episode that will be for our Patreons. So if you're a Patreon, you'll look for it and you can hear a little bit more about the adventure of these two Victorian maids.
That's fascinating.
Ladies. Yeah, I hope it wasn't too rambling.
No, it was good. I liked it. I love that kind of stuff.
I know. It's not just like weird hauntings. It's like Victorian times. And it's like
I love Victorian and I love hauntings.
You should find this book that I got was off script, so you can find it and read it. It's not that long of a book. It's kind of a quick read. But I mean, the two accounts the ladies wrote were very similar in spots, so you kind of have to skip through it. So was it time travel? Did they find a weird time loop, or was it a haunting? What do you think?
I think it's a haunting.
I think so too.
Energy is stuck there,
and they said that like the energy is stuck with Marie Antoinette, and like because she spent time hiding out there,
right,
listening to her servants and her friends basically get killed.
Ugh.
She's trying to will herself back to happy times, and they said that morning. Like, when you go there on that day, it's her trying to relive a happy time or before. Like, because a big event happened that day, and it's like reliving that event. So it's like a weird time loop thing or a replay of energy.
Yeah, for sure. And I always say that I really believe that that's what happens. Regardless if the person dies, if it's good or bad, that stuff loops forever.
And the fact that only Charlotte saw the woman sitting on the stool was... Like, they said they looked up they saw lots of paintings of Marie Antoinette, but it wasn't until they found a book written by a man, and I can't remember the man's name, but in this book there was a drawing that someone had made of Marie Antoinette, and they said it was the first time, like, they saw that, she saw that drawing and said, oh my god, that looks just like a woman who is sitting on the stool.
Wow.
But it's probably because if somebody is just doing, like, a drawing, it's not like a painter who needs to get rid of your flaws.
Yeah, it's not like he's photoshopping.
It's like, it's
the painter photoshops.
It's a candid family photo, you know?
Yeah.
But she said it was, when she saw the picture, she's like, oh my god, it's the woman who was sitting on the stool. So it's just kind of.
Yeah, and then her friend also told her that other people have seen her sitting there wearing the same thing that they saw.
Yeah. And I think when she described her hair as fair, and there was a lot of it piled up on top of her head, and she had this hat on top, but her hair in the front was all fluffy and frizzy and sticking out. And it just, like, it's just kind of one of those, like, I'm home and I don't have to look perfect type of things, you know?
She was in her farmhouse. She wasn't even in the palace.
Right.
It's like me right now, living homeless.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I do have clothes on because I had to take my middle child to a play date today with her best friend, who's a little boy, and it's adorable.
Aww.
And then she's going to have another one on Friday, and she's so excited. I'm like, oh, I just love that. She's at that age. She's in 4th grade, so this is
Margaret, you need to tell everyone what she got.
Oh, but she hasn't yet.
Oh, she hasn't.
She hasn't. Well, we're not really wrong. Like, what she's in my middle child is in the school play, and she wants the main character. And she said, I got to be the main character, but it's because they were practicing for auditions. And she didn't realize, like, that first, like, she divided all the kids up in groups of 5, and then the first group she got to practice as her. Oh. And then they had auditions Thursday, but, like, on Wednesday she told me, well, I had to be this other character, and she was yelling some of the lines, and she's like, I go, that sounds great. Did you like doing her? She's like, it kind of made my throat hurt. She yells a lot. So honestly, if she gets the mean person role, I think she would do good too, because she's the Queen of Hearts. It's Alice in Wonderland, and she wants to be Alice, but she played the Queen of Hearts, and I honestly feel she's probably going to be the Queen of Hearts. That's just my feeling. I know, and I think she'd be amazing.
Oh my god, I almost like that better.
Me too. But she's constantly, like, I mean, they've had, a week? Not quite. A week and a day of practice, right? And, because they had practice on Friday, and then they had practice Monday, and they had practice Wednesday, and they had practice Thursday. And it's like, she's singing the songs already. Like, she knows them. She's a good memory. Yeah, I used to.
I have a shriveled up raisin brain.
I know. I said that every child you have, they absorb some of your brain cells.
Yeah.
So I'm really stupid now. I know.
Well, that's fun. Anyway, so if you want to hear the companion episode of this, you want to go on our patreon.com/weird. For $1 a month, you're going to get the bonus episode and a free sticker. And then if you really want to get deeper into it, you can do the $5 a month, which is Tale of Trenders, and you get the bonus episodes and free sticker. You also get free episodes and then a monthly chat.
Yeah, if you want to reach out to us, you can send us a direct message through either Facebook or Instagram. Also, please follow us on both those profiles. Rate us, on Facebook. Give us a rating and a review. You can also send us an email at thecousinsweird@gmail.com.
And we just got a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts from Shelby, I think.
Yeah, she actually has her own podcast, which is called Addicted to Crime, and it's pretty great. I've been listening to it. It's very informative. I like it. So check it out if you like true crime podcasts. It's something new to listen to.
Thank you, Shelby, for giving us 5 stars and saying you are going to binge, which if we can be binge-worthy, that's my goal.
Mine
too. If you find us and we're binge-worthy to you, thank you, friends.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So, yeah, follow us on Facebook and Instagram because we post the pictures from the episodes. You can kind of see what we're talking about. We always share what we were talking about on there. We also will share any events we have coming up.
Rate us, follow us, listen to us, share us. Stay freaky! Bye!